The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. That's Eleanor Roosevelt. And, it feels pretty relevant today as we get into a topic where technology dreams and maybe nightmares are really reshaping global power. Welcome, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today, we are diving headfirst into, a really critical and, frankly, pretty surprising area of military tech, hypersonic missiles. And here's the kicker our sources are pointing to. The usual global pecking order. It's not just shifting, it's being seriously challenged. And the big surprise, the world's most dominant military power seems to be trailing its rivals, maybe even some newer players, in this specific cutting-edge field. So for this deep dive, we've pulled together a recent analysis on military tech, some specific details from that recent conflict everyone was watching. An expert takes on these new capabilities. Our goal today, to really unpack why the U.S., the military giant, be behind here, and what that actually means for global dynamics, for deterrence, for global security moving forward. And if you're a UPSC aspirant keeping a close eye on global current affairs for your mains or prelims, or maybe you're just curious about the forces shaping our world, this deep dive is definitely for you. We're aiming to boil down some complex stuff into insights you can actually use, whether that's in an exam or just understanding the news better. Okay, so before we jump into this kind of surprising situation, let's just round ourselves in something most people accept as true. The undeniable military strength of the United States. We saw a pretty stark example of this recently, didn't we? During that intense 12-day war between Iran and Israel. The way the U.S. projected power there was, quite something. Picture this. 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers. The one with those big Batwing planes? They launch from the U.S., fly halfway across the world, and hit Iranian nuclear sites with pinpoint accuracy. And they weren't using just any bombs. They dropped the GBU-57 MOP, that's a massive ordnance penetrator, basically the world's biggest bunker buster. And after all that, they flew back to the U.S., completely undetected. I mean, the message couldn't be clearer, right? U.S. bombers can go pretty much anywhere, hit targets deep underground, and get home safe. It shows incredible global reach.
That's absolutely right. And the scale of that operation is really important to grasp. Even Israel, which has incredibly advanced military tech, top-notch intelligence, a great air force, they still needed the U.S. for those specific things, the B-2s, and particularly those GBU-57 bombs. It just highlights the unique technological advantage the U.S. holds, even compared to its, closest allies in the West. Its capability, few, if any others have. It sets a baseline of dominance that, in most areas, really is unchallenged.
Right. But, and this is the fascinating part, here's where we find this contradiction, this unexpected chink in the armor, maybe?
Yeah.
Despite that dominance we just talked about, across so many fields, our sources showing one critical area where the U.S. isn't just lagging, it's trailing significantly.
Yeah. And what's really striking here, and honestly a bit of a strategic surprise, is how far behind they seem to be in this specific area. It's not just that the U.S. is behind, say, Russia and China, who you'd expect to be competitors. The reports we're seeing suggest that they might also be trailing countries some analysts are calling novice upstarters, like Iran, like North Korea, which is pretty remarkable when you think about the investment, right? The U.S. has been working on this stuff for, 2.5 decades, poured billions and billions of dollars into it, and yet they're still behind several countries. And tellingly, there were reports suggesting Iran actually used this Western handicap during that 12-day war, fired multiple hypersonic missiles, apparently, at Israel, challenging those existing defenses.
Okay, so let's unpack that term then. Hypersonic weapons. We hear it thrown around a lot. What does it actually mean for someone trying to understand this, maybe for an exam? Well, simply put, hypersonic speed is anything faster than Mach 5. 5 times the speed of sound. And that's not just a random number. It's the point where the actual physics of flying change dramatically. The air behaves differently. You need totally new engineering, advanced materials, incredibly powerful engines. To put it in perspective, Mach 5 is about, 100 kilometers a minute? Or 60 miles a minute. That's like a mile every single second. But, and this is key, it's not just about being fast. It's that speed combined with maneuverability that makes them so dangerous and hard to stop.
Exactly. That maneuverability is the absolute crucial difference compared to, say, ICBM's intercontinental ballistic missiles, which we've known about for decades. Now, both hypersonics and ICBMs get launched high up by rockets, right? But Their flight paths are totally different after that. ICBMs fly in a predictable arc, a parabola. They go way up, maybe into space, and then mostly just fall with gravity towards the target. Their path is, relatively speaking, predictable. You can calculate where they're going, even if hitting them is hard. Hypersonic weapons, though, they dive back into the atmosphere much sooner. They flatten out their trajectory, and they use internal navigation, little fins or controls, to make course corrections while they're flying at these incredible speeds, sometimes over Mach 12. So unlike that high predictable arc of an ICBM, a hypersonic missile can fly lower, and here's the really critical part. It can change direction, change its target, even change speed mid-flight. It's this ability to weave, to duck, to accelerate unexpectedly that makes them incredibly difficult for current radar and defense systems to track, and therefore extremely challenging, maybe even impossible right now, to shoot down.
That makes it very clear and kind of alarming. So, okay, keeping that distinction in mind, our sources talk about two main types of these weapons in this global race. First, there are hypersonic glide vehicles, or HGVs. These get boosted up by a rocket, like an ICBM, but then the HGV part separates and glides. It doesn't have an engine running, but it uses its shape in the atmosphere to maneuver at hypersonic speeds towards the target. Then, the second type, hypersonic cruise missiles. These are different. They have special high-speed air-breathing engines called scramjets running the whole time. Scramjets basically use the missile's sheer speed to compress the air coming in, mix fuel, and create thrust, so they can fly fast and powered within the atmosphere. And it's worth mentioning some really advanced ballistic missiles if they can make significant evasive moves right at the end, just before they hit. Sometimes they get grouped into this broader hypersonic category too because of that maneuverability.
Right.
Now let's look at Iran. They've been claiming hypersonic capabilities for a while now. And honestly, these claims have often been met with a lot of skepticism in the West. Maybe dismissive propaganda. They talk about two main missiles, Fateh 1 and the Fateh 2. And actually, back on June 18th, Iranian state media put out this dramatic footage. They claimed it showed Fateh 1 missiles hitting targets in Tel Aviv during that recent war.
Yeah, and this is where you get this direct clash of narratives. It's a real debate among analysts, Israeli sources, the IDF, other Western officials. They've mostly pushed back, saying true hypersonic missiles, meaning ones with that really advanced dynamic maneuverability, weren't used. They argue that what Iran fired were basically advanced ballistic missiles. Maybe they could maneuver a bit, perhaps pre-programmed moves, but not the kind of mid-course changes we were just talking about. There's a quote from Yehoshua Kaliski. He's a senior researcher at INSS, an Israel former defense scientist. He said something like, most of the missiles Iran has deployed against Israel travel at hypersonic speed, but are barely maneuverable, so are not considered true hypersonic missiles. His point is, speed alone isn't enough. However, and this is important, even Kaliski acknowledged that Iran's other missiles, the Fateh 2 and the Khorramshahr, might actually fit the hypersonic category because of some reported features. And Iran specifically claimed they fired the Fateh 2 during the war, so were they testing it? It adds another layer of complexity.
Okay, so there's debate about the exact classification. But here's where it gets really interesting, right? Regardless of whether they meet the strictest definition of true hypersonic, think about the impact. The undeniable fact is, a significant number of Iranian missiles, whatever you call them, got through Israel's very sophisticated multi-layered air defense system. That's a big deal. These weren't just near misses. They hit residential areas, not just Tel Aviv, but Haifa, Ashdod, Beersheba, other places too. So what that suggests is, at the very least, some of those missiles hit hypersonic speeds and had enough maneuverability to beat or overwhelm the defenses. And that capability itself is critical.
Precisely. So you have experts arguing about the labels true hypersonic versus advanced ballistic with hypersonic features. But what you can't argue with is the effectiveness Iran demonstrated. Their missile firepower in that conflict was, frankly, pretty impressive, getting through those kinds of defenses, causing impacts that forces military planners everywhere to sit up and take notice. It shows that even if you don't have the absolute top-tier dynamically maneuvering system, just combining high speed with even limited unpredictability poses a major, major challenge to current defenses.
Which brings us right back to that stark reality, the really surprising part of this whole story. America's, well, what some sources are calling a dismal showing in getting its own hypersonic weapons actually operational. I mean, it's not like they haven't been trying. The U.S. has been pursuing this since the early 2000s, right?
Yeah.
Out of that conventional prompt global strike idea, being able to hit any target on Earth within an hour.
It's definitely a complex picture and a frustrating one for the Pentagon, based on the reports. The Department of Defense has multiple programs running, lots of money involved. You've got the Army's LRHW, that's a long-range hypersonic weapon. The Navy's working on CPS, conventional prompt strike, for ships and subs. The Air Force has HACM, the Hypersonic Attack Cruise Missile. And then you have DARPA, the Advanced Research Agency, funding things like HAWC, the Hypersonic Air-breathing weapon concept. I mean, the investment is huge. The budget requests keep climbing from about US $3.8 billion in FY22 up to nearly US $7 billion requested for FY25. But, and here's the crunch, despite all that money, all that effort, as of mid-2025, none of these major U.S. programs have actually delivered an operational weapons system. They're still stuck in prototyping and testing. And the reasons seem to be, well, multifaceted. There are issues with huge cost overruns, problems with technical maturity, things like finding materials that can handle the insane heat, getting the propulsion systems stable, the guidance systems right, and crucially, they've had quite a few well-publicized test failures. Some analysts point to maybe relying too much on the usual big defense contractors, or maybe a fragmented approach across the different services causing delays. Plus, the sheer physics of it, the heat, the stress, the precision needed for a sustained hypersonic flight, it's just proving incredibly difficult to master consistently. It's a massive investment with, so far, a pretty slow operational return.
And that's in really sharp contrast to what other countries are doing, isn't it? When you look at who actually has these things fielded, the picture looks quite different.
Oh, absolutely. If you connect this to the bigger global picture, the contrast is stark. It really does signal a potential shift. Take Russia. They already claim 3 operational hypersonic missiles. There's the Kinzhal, which is air-launched, the Tsirkon, launched from ships or subs, and the Avangard, which is one of those glide vehicles launched off an ICBM. And just recently, there were reports they ordered mass production of a 4th one called the Oreshnik. So they seem committed and appear to be making real progress in fielding these systems. And then you have China. China isn't just in the race. Many observers say they're demonstrably leading it. Our sources flatly state that China has the world's leading hypersonic arsenal. They have systems like the DF-17 missile already deployed, reportedly capable of hitting U.S. bases across the Pacific. This gives them a significant strategic edge, particularly thinking about the Indo-Pacific Taiwan regional access denial. These weapons really boost their capabilities there. So yeah, regardless of how you precisely categorize Iran's missiles, the bigger picture is undeniable. The U.S. is clearly trailing Russia and China in fielding operational hypersonic weapons, and potentially, maybe even Iran.
So, okay, stepping back, what does all this actually mean for global security? For the balance of power? I think the key takeaway from this deep dive is pretty significant. That narrative of undisputed American military technological superiority, while it's still true in many, many areas, it definitely has a real crack when it comes to hypersonic weapons. And this isn't just theoretical. This gap has real-world consequences, as we saw hinted at in the Middle East conflict. And it's definitely changing strategic thinking in places like the Indo-Pacific.
Right. And this really leads to a big question for you, the listener, to think about, something that builds on everything we've discussed. Consider the implications. What does it mean to have these super fast, highly maneuverable weapons that can apparently get past traditional missile defenses? How might that fundamentally change military strategy? Does it make nations lean towards, more aggressive first strike postures because defense seems less reliable? What kind of new alliances might form? Will countries scramble to either develop their own hypersonics or partner with those who have them? And maybe most importantly, how does this affect deterrence? That whole idea of mutually assured destruction that kept the Cold War, well, cold. Does that still hold if one side thinks it can strike with impunity? Some analysts worry it could be deeply destabilizing. What does it mean for smaller nations trying to push back against bigger powers? Or for that delicate power balance in hotspots like the Indo-Pacific? It throws a lot of established thinking up in the air.
Lots to think about there. We really hope this deep dive has given you a clearer, maybe more nuanced picture of this incredibly fast-moving area of global security. Whether you're prepping for the UPSC mains, trying to boost your general knowledge about world affairs, or just feeding your curiosity, our goal here is always to be your shortcut to being well-informed. If you found this deep dive valuable, please do give us a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and maybe share it with others who you think would find it interesting. And please, if you have more questions or ideas for topics you'd like us to tackle in future deep dives, drop us a comment below. We genuinely appreciate hearing from you and getting your feedback.